In the middle of a noisy, overcrowded McDonald's, a poor 10-year-old girl suddenly burst out of the restroom, clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her cheeks. In a panic, she screamed, "Mom, they hurt me." No one in the restaurant could have imagined the horror hiding behind that bathroom door. What happened next would uncover a brutal truth, a cruel game masked by adult smiles. From that very moment, a mother, a stranger, and one frightened little girl began a journey to reclaim justice, truth, courage, and the voices the world had long chosen to ignore. The morning sun hadn't fully stretched itself across the cracked sidewalk when Nicole laced up her daughter's faded sneakers. The girls sat on the stoop outside their small apartment, knees tucked to her chest, hair still damp from the sink. A single robin sang somewhere above them, and for a moment, it felt like the world was kind. Kayla was 10, but there were mornings she seemed older, like now, sitting quietly, arms wrapped around herself, as if she knew more about sorrow than she ought to. Nicole knelt down and tied the last knot. "All set, sweetheart." Kayla didn't answer right away. She looked at her mother the way children do when they're trying to say something too big for their mouths. "Do I have to smile when I don't feel like it?" Nicole's hands paused on the shoelaces. She sat back on her heels. "No, baby, not today." The girl looked away. "Some people smile when they lie." Nicole swallowed the knot rising in her throat. They didn't talk about the man who used to live with them. They didn't talk about the shouting or the things Kayla had seen but didn't have names for yet. But the silence between them held all of it, humming like a lone note in the walls. Nicole stood and brushed off her jeans. "What do you say we make today ours? Just you and me. Park first, then McDonald's." Kayla cracked the faintest smile. "Happy Meal?" Nicole winked. "With extra fries." That was their ritual when the days got too heavy. They made new memories, light ones. It didn't fix everything, but it helped. The car ride was quiet, save for the soft hum of the radio. Nicole kept one hand on the wheel, one eye on the rearview, watching her daughter's reflection, chin tilted to the glass, watching the sky like she was trying to read something only she could see. At the park, Kayla ran toward the swings with a kind of fragile joy. Nicole sat on the bench and watched her daughter's back rise and fall with each arc of the swing. For a moment it was almost easy to believe nothing bad had ever happened to them. A man on a nearby bench was arguing with someone on the phone. His voice cut through the air, sharp, dismissive, full of bile. "She's a kid, not a princess. Let her toughen up. The world doesn't care if she cries." Nicole turned her face away. She'd heard too many versions of that sentence in her life, sometimes shouted, sometimes whispered inside her own mind. Kayla slowed the swing, dragging her sneakers along the gravel. She looked up at her mom. "Why do people hurt people and then act like it's normal?" Nicole's breath caught. The question was too honest, too early in the day. She walked over, crouched beside her daughter, and brushed hair from the girl's cheek. "Because some people forgot what it means to feel. But you didn't. That makes you brave." Kayla nodded slowly, her lips pressing together. She didn't cry, not anymore. That was the part that scared Nicole most. Later, they drove to McDonald's. The golden arches shimmered in the noon haze, the parking lot full of laughter and the smell of fried oil. To anyone else, it was an ordinary scene. To Nicole, it was a small victory, every mundane moment a defiance of everything they'd survived. Inside, Nicole told Kayla to find a table near the back while she stood in line. The place was crowded. A group of teenage boys laughed too loudly in the corner. Two men stood off near the restrooms, whispering. Something about them felt off. Nicole couldn't place it, but she smiled at Kayla anyway and handed her the phone. "Watch something while I order, okay?" Kayla nodded and walked toward the table, glancing once at the bathroom door. Nicole turned back to the counter, unaware that those next few minutes would shatter everything she'd built. But in that moment, there was still peace, still a daughter and a mother trying to outrun memory, still a morning full of fragile hope. And in Kayla's small, unspoken voice, there lived a child who hadn't given up believing the world could still be kind. The McDonald's off Rosewood Avenue wasn't anything special, just a tired little building with sun-bleached posters and a soda machine that wheezed when it poured. But to Nicole, it was tradition, a place where you could pretend things were okay, a place with extra ketchup and no judgment. Kayla held her hand tighter as they crossed the lot. She didn't speak, just looked up at the golden arches like she was hoping they'd light up something inside her again. Nicole squeezed back. "Today's yours, honey. All of it." Inside, the restaurant buzzed with the kind of chaos that made everything feel a little too loud, fryers crackling, teenagers laughing too hard, toddlers crying over spilled Sprite. Nicole took a deep breath. Crowds never used to bother her, but lately, everything did. "Go find us a seat near the back. I'll order." Kayla nodded and moved toward the corner booth by the restrooms. She walked slowly, like the floor wasn't quite solid beneath her feet. Nicole stepped into line behind a woman yelling into her phone. "I told him he can't just show up after 2 years and think he gets a second chance. I don't care if he's clean now." The words landed harder than they should have. Nicole looked away. Behind her, the door chimed again. 2 men walked in, mid-30s maybe. One wore a wrinkled denim jacket, the other had a ball cap pulled low. They didn't look at the menu, just stood near the bathrooms, whispering, like they had business that didn't involve burgers. Nicole's gaze drifted toward Kayla, now sitting quietly, phone in hand, knees drawn up to the edge of the seat, safe for now. The cashier barked, "Next." Nicole ordered quickly, 2 Happy Meals, one with extra fries, no pickles, and a coffee that would probably go cold before she touched it. As she waited, she kept glancing toward the back. The 2 men were still there. One of them caught her eye and grinned. It wasn't a smile, it was a smirk that stuck to your skin like old gum. She turned away fast, heart suddenly thudding. "You're imagining it," she muttered under her breath. "Paranoia is not protection." The food came. She thanked the kid behind the counter and carried the tray, carefully weaving between strollers and sticky chairs. But when she reached the table, Kayla was gone. Panic hit like a slap. "Kayla." She looked around, and then she heard it, the faint squeak of the restroom door swinging shut. A sigh. Just the bathroom. She exhaled, placed the tray down, and sat. She told herself to breathe. She's 10. She knows to lock the door. She'll be back in a minute. But the feeling in her gut wouldn't let go. Across the room, the 2 men were still loitering. One leaned against the wall, scratching his neck. The other casually glanced toward the restroom, then down at his phone. They weren't laughing now. They were waiting. Nicole stood, not quickly, just enough to stretch, she told herself, enough to see the hallway better. The men didn't look at her, but she could feel the tension coil like smoke around her throat. "You ever think about what you'd do if it happened again?" A voice in her head whispered. "If no one believed you again? If you were just another woman screaming in a room full of people looking away?" She stepped forward. That's when she saw him, a man sitting alone near the window, gray hair, reading glasses hanging from his collar. He wore a navy cardigan and had the quiet presence of someone who had nothing to prove. He watched the room like someone who had watched too much of life already. But his eyes were locked on the 2 men by the restroom. He didn't move, didn't speak, but when he saw Nicole watching, he nodded once, just once. And suddenly, she didn't feel alone. A door creaked, then a sound she'd never forget, soft at first, then sharper. "Mom." Nicole ran, not walked, not hurried, ran. The bathroom door flew open. Kayla stumbled out, clutching her stomach, face pale, eyes wide and full of something ancient. She wasn't bleeding, but she was broken. Something had been taken. Nicole dropped to her knees. Baby, what happened? Kayla couldn't speak. She shook her head, fists clenched at her sides, trying to disappear inside herself. From behind, one of the men moved. The gray-haired man was there first. Don't, he said. The word was low, final, like an iron gate closing. Sit down. The man backed away. People were starting to look now. Raina, the young girl behind the counter, pulled out her phone. Nicole gathered her daughter in her arms, rocking her gently. It's over, sweetheart. I'm here. I've got you. Kayla whispered something barely audible. He said I was just a girl, and nobody would believe me. Nicole froze, and then she looked up at the man near the window. He was still there, watching. He didn't smile, but he nodded again, and she understood, he'd believed her before anyone else. The hallway to the restroom smelled faintly of bleach and something older, wet paper towels, forgotten corners. Kayla stepped inside hesitantly, her fingers trailing the edge of the tile wall, like she needed to hold on to something sure to something solid. The door to the family restroom creaked open with that long, tired groan most public doors seem to carry. She reached for the lock, clicked it shut, and turned to face the mirror. It was cracked slightly at the bottom, like someone had once punched it in frustration and left the memory behind. Kayla's reflection stared back at her, quiet eyes, chipped nail polish, a small scab forming on her chin from where she tripped on the playground a few days earlier. She exhaled slowly, then moved to the stall. The handle rattled. She froze. Another sound, a shuffle of feet, a knock, then a low voice, male, not mom. Hey, forgot to clean in here. You okay, sweetheart? Something about the way he said, sweetheart, made her stomach twist. It wasn't kind, it was syrupy, thin, and sharp underneath. She didn't answer. Then another knock, louder this time. Come on, open up. You're not supposed to lock it from the inside. Her fingers trembled on the stall door. That's when the second voice came, firmer, colder. Just scare her. That'll shut her up. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. She backed up until her back hit the wall. There were two of them. One blocked the door, the other stepped in slowly, like this was routine. Won't take long, the first said, lifting something from his pocket, a bottle, thick, cloudy. Glue. On your knees. The other muttered, you clean this up, and we're good. Kayla shook her head. The first man frowned. No. That's what's wrong with kids today. No respect. He grabbed her wrist and yanked her forward. She stumbled, fell to her knees, her hands scraping against the edge of the sink. Let me go, she whispered, voice breaking. I didn't do anything. The second man crouched beside her. Exactly. And nobody'll care. You're just some girl eating chicken nuggets. Then came the push, not hard, but enough to knock the air from her lungs as she hit the ground. A hot jolt of pain flared in her side. Her arms shook as she tried to crawl away. Stop crying, the first barked. You'll make it worse. She gasped for breath, her hands now sticky with something she didn't recognize, glue, blood, it didn't matter. That's when she remembered something her mom once whispered on one of those nights when the world felt unsafe. Even if they're bigger, you still get to say no. Even if you're scared. Kayla turned, kicked wildly, hitting the shin of the man closest to her. He yelped, grabbed his leg. She scrambled past him, threw herself at the door. It didn't open. The second man laughed. Wrong lock, genius. Her fingers found the right one. This time, she wrenched it free, and then she ran. Nicole had only been waiting 3 minutes, but mothers like her count seconds differently. When you've known what it's like to have no one believe you, 3 minutes can feel like standing alone in a burning room. She rose from the table just as Kayla burst into the restaurant, hands clutching her stomach, face ashen, eyes wide with the kind of fear children should never have to wear. "Mom," she screamed. Nicole ran, coffee forgotten, food untouched. Her arms caught Kayla mid-stumble. They tried, Kayla couldn't say it. She just shook, her body curling inward. People looked. A few stood, but no one moved fast enough, except for one. The older man, Nathaniel, stood, walked toward them with calm purpose. He'd seen something, enough to know when a child had been broken. Nicole's eyes met his, pleading without words. "Please," she said, "help us." Nathaniel turned to the hallway. The two men were emerging, slow and indifferent, like they hadn't done a thing wrong. One smirked. The other adjusted his belt. "Back off," one snapped. "It's not what it looks like." Nathaniel didn't flinch. "What it looks like," he said, voice quiet but cutting, "is that you cornered a child in a locked room. What it feels like is something no decent man should be able to stomach." A pause, then the man laughed. "You don't know a damn thing. She's just a kid who doesn't listen." Nathaniel's eyes didn't leave them. "Then you won't mind waiting for the police. If I'm wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. If I'm right, well, you'll have bigger things to fear than a little girl." Nicole held Kayla close. The girl was still trembling, still clinging to the folds of her mother's shirt like it was the only safe place left in the world. From behind the counter, Raina picked up the phone and started dialing. And for the first time since Kayla ran out, the room held its breath. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. Reports were taken. The men were led out in cuffs, still mouthing denials, still laughing like none of it mattered. Kayla watched through the window, wrapped in a donated blanket, head against her mother's chest. "Will they come back?" she whispered. Nicole kissed her forehead. "Not if I can help it." Then she looked at the man who had stood for them when no one else did. Nathaniel met her gaze, and this time he smiled, not the kind of smile that says everything is okay, but the kind that says you're not alone. Not anymore. The police lights flickered against the smudged windows of the McDonald's, casting blue and red stains across the tile floor like broken glass. Nicole sat with her daughter cradled in her lap, a blanket wrapped around Kayla's trembling frame. Her skin was still damp with panic. Her eyes, those steady, soulful eyes, now darted at every sudden movement, unsure of what the world might do next. She hadn't spoken again, not since the hallway, not since she whispered those 5 words that gutted every mother in earshot, "Mom, they hurt me." Nicole's fingers combed gently through her daughter's hair. She didn't speak either, not yet, because there are moments so sacred, so sharp, that language can only bruise them. Raina, the teenage worker, stood nearby, visibly shaken. She'd given the officers her statement twice, voice cracking both times. "I didn't know, I swear. I just thought they were customers." Nathaniel remained close, leaning against the far wall, arms crossed. He had the look of someone who had once sat in a room like this, years ago, maybe decades, and never quite left. One of the officers approached. Ramirez, his name tag read, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, wedding ring worn smooth with time. He knelt beside Nicole slowly, not invading the space, just waiting. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we need to ask your daughter a few questions, but only if she's ready." "We can wait." Nicole looked down at Kayla. "Sweetheart, do you want to tell them?" Kayla didn't move, but after a long silence, she whispered, "Only if Mommy stays." "I'm not going anywhere," Nicole said, her voice steady but full of splinters. The officer gave a small nod. "All right. Whenever you're ready." Kayla sat up slightly, her fingers never leaving the hem of her mother's sweater. She looked at the floor as she spoke, as if afraid that meeting someone's eyes would make it all real again. "They came in after me. One of them said the door was broken, that he had to fix it. I told them to leave. I said no, but he laughed. And then the other one, he pushed me. Nicole's breath hitched. She didn't interrupt. They made me get down and wipe stuff. There was glue and trash. It smelled bad. I didn't want to. They told me no one would care, that I was just a girl. Her voice cracked. Just a girl. Ramirez looked down. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, finally, you're not just anything, kiddo. He stood and walked back toward his partner. Nicole saw him pull out a small notepad, his jaw tight. One of the men, the one with the smirk, had been sitting on the curb outside, still handcuffed, still mocking the entire process. She's lying, he shouted suddenly. Drama queen, probably trying to get attention. Nicole stood, her voice like gravel under tires. She's 10. He scoffed. Kids make stuff up all the time. You'd know, wouldn't you? Nicole stepped toward him. Nathaniel moved too, quickly, firmly placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't. He wants you to break. She stopped but didn't look away. You don't get to win this time, she said. Not with her. Not with me. The man looked away first. Inside, the officers were speaking to the store manager now, asking for surveillance footage. Carlos, the manager, seemed defensive, flustered. Look, we don't have cameras inside the bathrooms. That's illegal. And those two guys? Yeah, they come in sometimes. Seemed normal enough. Nathaniel stepped forward. Did you see them go into the hallway after the girl? Carlos hesitated. I didn't notice. Reina spoke up from the corner. I did. Everyone turned to her. I saw them. They weren't fixing anything. They were laughing when they came out. One of them, he wiped his hands on her jacket. I didn't know what it meant, but now. Her voice faltered. Nicole reached out a hand. Reina took it. There was no courtroom, no judge's gavel, not yet. But in that moment, in the still air of a cheap fast food dining room, something shifted. Later, when the officers had taken their reports and the crowd had thinned, Nicole and Kayla sat on a bench outside under the dull buzz of a flickering parking lot light. Nathaniel stood nearby, his coat folded over one arm. Kayla had fallen asleep, head in her mother's lap. Nicole looked up at him. Thank you for stepping in. You didn't have to. Nathaniel's eyes were soft behind his glasses. No one has to. That's the problem. She studied him. There was history behind his voice, not loud, but etched into the way he held himself. You've seen this before, she said. He nodded. Not the same, but close enough. Once, someone hurt my little sister in a place just like this. I was too late. I've been trying to show up on time ever since. A pause hung between them. Then Nicole asked, did she heal? Nathaniel looked at the stars. Not all the way, but she learned how to live with the scar. Nicole looked down at her daughter. And maybe today, someone watching remembers a name too, someone they once wished they could have protected. If there's someone like that in your heart, say their name in the comments. Let them be seen. Let them be remembered. I don't want her to grow up thinking the world will always hurt her. She won't, he said. Not with you beside her. Nicole smiled faintly. It wasn't joy, it was something quieter, something rooted. She's stronger than she knows, and I'm more tired than I let on. Nathaniel chuckled softly. Aren't we all? The breeze picked up. Kayla stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. Nathaniel looked out at the empty parking lot, then back at Nicole. There's more you can do, you know. What do you mean? You speak, people listen. You could tell your story. You could be what someone else needs to hear. Nicole considered that, then nodded slowly. Maybe when the bruises stop blooming. Nathaniel didn't push. He just sat beside her, both of them watching the quiet world, knowing that tomorrow would ask something more from them. But for now, in this moment, they let stillness hold them, not victory, not yet, but not defeat either. Just breath, and the beginning of something that might one day be called healing. By the time the sun had started to slip behind the rooftop of the shopping plaza, the McDonald's had mostly emptied. Paper wrappers clung to the floor like shed skins. A janitor with tired knees swept fries into a pan while the last hum of lunchtime faded into a quiet that always comes after something breaks. Nicole sat on the bench outside, Kayla still curled beside her, asleep but not resting. Children don't rest after fear, they retreat and rebuild themselves from silence. Nathaniel Graves hadn't moved far. He stood a few paces away, arms crossed, watching the parking lot as if it might try something. He didn't look like a savior. No cape, no badge, just an old man in a cardigan and pressed slacks, the kind of man who brought his own spoon to diners because the metal at restaurants hurt his teeth. But Nicole knew better. Some people stand up once in their lives and never sit down again. "Sir," she said softly. He turned, the movement careful, like he'd learned not to startle anyone. "I don't know what you saw, but thank you for seeing it." Nathaniel nodded, slow and grave. "Most people look. Very few actually see." Nicole shifted slightly. "Why did you step in?" There was a long pause, then he said, "Because once I didn't." He sat beside her, not too close, and folded his hands over his knees. "When I was a boy, my sister Lydia, she was 11. The neighbor's son used to wait until we were walking home from school. He never hit her where it bruised, but it showed eventually. You know what my father said? He said, 'Boys will be boys. Toughen her up.' And I believed him. I believed that turning away was safer, more practical, less embarrassing. And I watched Lydia grow up to think that being afraid was normal, that being ignored was love. I've spent 40 years trying to unlearn what I should have known that day." Nicole didn't interrupt. "Sometimes the only answer grief wants is quiet. I can't change what happened to her," Nathaniel continued, "but I can choose not to repeat it." A silence passed between them, heavy and dignified. Then Kayla stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Mom." Nicole smoothed her hand down her daughter's back. "I'm here." Kayla looked up at Nathaniel with sleepy eyes, her voice barely a breeze. "You saw them too." "I did," he said, "and I'm going to help you make sure everyone else sees them too." Nicole swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind with creased corners and pen marks in the margins. He flipped it open and held it between them. "I used to be a litigation advisor," he said. "Now I fund support teams for child protection cases, especially ones the system overlooks. I know what's coming, the denials, the distractions, there's no proof arguments. But I also know how to build a case that makes ignoring you impossible." Nicole blinked, stunned. "Why us?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Because you didn't look away from your daughter when she came out screaming. You didn't freeze. You didn't doubt her. And that matters more than you know." Nicole bit her lip. For the first time that day, she felt something almost like relief. From the distance came the voice of Carlos, the store manager, still talking to the police. "Look, I told you, we don't film near the bathrooms. We've got privacy rules. That woman's probably just trying to get money out of this. I mean, who leaves a kid alone in a public restroom anyway?" Nicole's body went stiff. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He rose, adjusted his sweater, and walked toward the officers. "Excuse me, officers," he said, voice calm but lined with stone. "I heard that statement, and I'd like to go on record." The officers turned. Ramirez, the lead, recognized him instantly. "You saw something?" "I did," Nathaniel said, "and I recorded it. It's on this phone." He handed it over. Footage from before the incident. You'll see the two suspects hovering near the hallway. You'll see one of them follow the girl. You'll see them return alone, laughing. Carlos shifted uncomfortably. That's circumstantial. Nathaniel turned to him. So is a bruise until it's matched with a hand. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the air. Ramirez examined the footage, then looked at Nathaniel. Can we keep this? I've already made a copy, Nathaniel replied, but I expect you to act on it quickly. Nicole watched it unfold from the bench, her heart thudding. For the first time in a long time, she felt something solid beneath her feet, not justice, not yet, but traction, a way forward. Later, as the sky melted into dusk and the McDonald's sign buzzed into tired fluorescence, Nathaniel returned to her side. I'll be in touch, he said. Nicole stood. Why are you really doing this? Nathaniel paused, then, with eyes not unlike a weathered father who'd lost something long ago, he said, because silence breeds monsters, and too many of them have gone unchallenged. Nicole looked at him, not just at his face, but deeper, past the wrinkles and the practiced composure. She saw the boy who didn't speak up, the brother who couldn't undo it, and she whispered, then let's be loud. They shook hands, no fanfare, no speeches, just two people deciding not to stay silent anymore. As Nathaniel walked away into the evening, his figure fading into the soft shadows of parking lot lights, Nicole looked down at her daughter once more. Kayla was watching her now, eyes open, expression unreadable. But after a moment, she said, he didn't look away. Nicole brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. No, she whispered, he didn't. And maybe that was how it began, not with a lawsuit, not with a headline, but with someone finally choosing to see. Nicole had always believed the hardest part of any tragedy was the moment it happened. She was wrong. It was the waiting, the hours after, the silence when everyone had gone home and the air still held the memory of screams. 3 days had passed. The world kept turning. The McDonald's had reopened. Customers came and went. The same cashiers showed up for their shifts. Fries hissed, drinks fizzed. Nothing had changed, except everything had. Nicole sat at the kitchen table in her small apartment, the wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners. Her coffee had gone cold. Across from her, Kayla colored quietly. Nicole noticed she hadn't used yellow or pink since the incident, only gray, dark blue, black. She doesn't talk about it, Nicole had told the child therapist the day before. Sometimes, the woman had said, children protect us from the pain by swallowing it themselves. Nicole looked up as a knock came at the door, 2 slow taps, firm, familiar. It was Nathaniel. He stepped inside with a soft nod and held a manila folder in his hands. His jacket was rain-specked, his face unreadable. I have something you need to see, he said. She didn't ask questions, just cleared the table. He sat, opened the folder, and slid out several still frames, surveillance screenshots. In the first, Kayla entering the hallway. In the next, one of the men following her, hand in his jacket, looking over his shoulder. Another showed him lingering at the door. The final one, his face turned directly to the camera, smirking. This wasn't chance, Nathaniel said. He knew what he was doing. Nicole stared at the photos, her hands shaking. And the other one? She asked. We have his phone. He slid another image across the table, a screenshot from a video. It was blurry but clear enough, Kayla's silhouette, small and cornered, facing 2 shadows. Nicole covered her mouth. Why? Why would anyone film that? Nathaniel's voice was low, tired. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they wear cologne and smile at cashiers. But their eyes, they forget to fix the eyes. She looked up at him. Will this be enough? Yes, he said, and no. She understood. Justice, real justice, was never swift. It was layered, fragile, easily derailed by doubt, loopholes, and money. But still, it was a beginning. That afternoon, Officer Ramirez called. A warrant had been issued. The two men were in custody. One had confessed, the other denied everything but had been caught deleting files off his phone. Nicole didn't cry. She waited until Kayla was asleep, then walked to the living room, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the dark, "They didn't win." Later that week, Nicole was asked to return to McDonald's to give a statement in front of regional management. Carlos, the manager, had submitted a report saying the event had been misunderstood and possibly exaggerated. Nathaniel insisted on going with her. Inside the office, Carlos sat stiffly, fingers clasped, eyes avoiding hers. "Look," he said, "no one's denying something happened, but this could hurt our franchise. We've got policies, protocols. You can't expect us to monitor every corner." Nicole remained calm. Then she stood. From her purse, she pulled out a photo of Kayla from 3 months earlier, where she stood in front of her school mural, wearing yellow rain boots and holding a crayon drawing that read, "Be kind." She placed it on the table. "This is who you're protecting your business from." Carlos opened his mouth, then closed it. Nathaniel leaned in. "Do the right thing," he said softly, "before the world learns what you failed to see." The next day, Reina, the young employee who had witnessed the men emerge laughing, was fired. The reason given, violation of employee policy. Nicole called her that night. Reina answered with a crackling voice. "I told the truth," she said, "and they punished me for it." Nicole's throat tightened. "I'll fix this," she whispered. Reina laughed bitterly. "You're a mom. You've already done enough." Nicole hung up and wept, not for herself, but for the girl who told the truth and paid for it, for the woman Nicole used to be, the one who stayed quiet because no one ever listened. She wouldn't be her again. A week later, local news picked up the story. It started with a quiet blog post by a community writer, Marla Owens, a journalist who'd heard whispers at church and decided to dig deeper. By morning, the headline was shared over 10,000 times. 10-year-old assaulted in family restroom while staff looked the other way. The story spread like wind through dry leaves. Nicole's phone buzzed non-stop. Some messages were cruel, "You're doing this for money. Where was the mom during all this? Kids lie." But others, "Thank you for speaking up. My daughter went through something similar. I never told anyone until now. Kayla didn't go back to school, not yet. She wasn't ready." But she began to hum again. One afternoon, Nicole walked past her room and paused. Kayla was painting, nothing dark this time, a field, a figure in yellow boots, a robin in the sky. Nicole didn't say a word, just pressed her fingers to her lips and closed her eyes. That evening, Nathaniel called. "You've done something rare," he said. "You made the silence flinch." Nicole stood at the window, watching dusk settle across the street. "You were right," she whispered. "The truth doesn't come clean. It bleeds its way out." Nathaniel was quiet, then, "I think your daughter will grow up to be someone who listens when no one else does." Nicole turned to look at Kayla's open bedroom door, the soft glow of a nightlight flickering against the wall. "I just want her to believe the world can still be good." Nathaniel's voice came through steady. "Then show her the people who are trying to make it that way." Nicole smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was the kind that came after war, the kind that said, "We survived, and now we begin again." The courtroom wasn't what Nicole expected. There were no high ceilings or dramatic oak benches like in the movies, just pale walls, flickering fluorescence, and a cheap clock ticking like it had nothing better to do. Still, the air felt heavier than any church she'd ever walked into, like the building itself knew this was a place where truth either lived or died. Kayla sat beside her in a navy blue dress they'd picked out together. No ruffles, no flowers, just something plain and quiet, something that wouldn't draw attention, even though everything today was about her. She gripped Nicole's fingers tightly. Her hands had grown thinner since the incident, or maybe Nicole had just noticed now that she was holding on so hard. Across the aisle, the two men sat with their lawyers. One was chewing gum, the other stared straight ahead, jaw set, eyes dull. Nicole had never hated a silence more than the one between them. The judge entered. Everyone stood. It began. The prosecution called Officer Ramirez first. His testimony was clean, factual, necessary. Then came the digital forensics expert, explaining how the phone data had been partially erased but partially recovered, the surveillance footage, the time-stamped messages. One of the men had texted, "This will be funny," 5 minutes before Kayla entered the restroom. Then they called Raina. She looked older than she had weeks ago. Her voice wavered at first but grew steadier as she spoke. They weren't customers. They weren't eating. They kept glancing at her, at the hallway. After she ran out, one of them laughed and said, "Guess she didn't like the game." One of the defense attorneys stood. "Miss Chavez, were you fired shortly after this incident?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Could it be that your testimony is retaliation?" Nicole's blood boiled. Raina didn't flinch. "I was fired because I told the truth, not because I lied." The room grew still. It was a small sentence, but it landed like a verdict. Finally, the judge called Kayla. She stood slowly, Nicole's hand slipping away from hers like a goodbye. Nathaniel was there, sitting in the back, still as stone. His presence wasn't loud, but it was enough to let Nicole breathe. Kayla stepped up to the witness stand, small and pale against the wood. The court clerk swore her in. The prosecutor crouched beside the podium. "Kayla, do you remember what happened that day?" She nodded. "Can you tell us in your own words?" Kayla blinked hard, her lips pressed together. Then she spoke slowly, like someone reciting something sacred. "They came into the bathroom after me. They told me to clean. One pushed me. I hit the floor. It hurt." "Did they touch you?" She looked down. "One of them grabbed my arm. He said I was just a dumb little girl, that nobody would believe me." Nicole closed her eyes. That sentence, that awful sentence, had lived inside her like a splinter. "What did you do then?" Kayla's voice cracked. I ran. I ran because Mommy told me, even if you're scared, you still get to say no." Nicole wept without making a sound. Then the defense attorney rose, his tone smooth, professional. "Kayla, you said you were pushed, but medical reports show no broken bones, just bruises. Is it possible you fell on your own?" Nicole gripped the seat edge. Kayla stared at him, confused. "No. He pushed me." The lawyer tried again. "You've watched shows on YouTube, right? Some of them are about pranks, correct?" "Yes. Could it be this was just a misunderstanding? A prank you didn't get?" There was a pause. Then Kayla looked at him, not scared, not confused, just tired. "If someone made you feel small and scared and hurt, would you call it a prank?" The lawyer opened his mouth, then shut it. The judge cleared her throat. No further questions. He sat down. When the testimonies ended, the court took a recess. Outside, Nicole and Kayla stood under a thin tree, its bare limbs trembling in the early spring wind. Nicole wrapped her arms around her daughter. "You were so brave." Kayla leaned into her. "I was scared." Nicole nodded. "You can be both." Nathaniel approached, slow as always. He didn't interrupt, just stood with them for a moment. "You shook them," he said quietly, "more than you know." Nicole looked up. "Will it be enough?" Nathaniel didn't promise. He never did. But he met her eyes and said, "Truth is a long fight, but today it didn't lose." 2 days later, the verdict came. Both men were found guilty of assault, child endangerment, and attempted obstruction of justice. The smirking one cried. The quiet one stared at the floor like it might open and swallow him. Nicole didn't cheer. She didn't clap. She simply held her daughter's hand and let the silence settle, for once, into peace. As they left the courthouse, reporters called out. "Nicole, do you have a statement?" She turned, eyes soft but unyielding. "Just this, believe your children, even when it's inconvenient, especially then." And with that, she walked away, Kayla beside her, shoulders straighter than before. That night, Nicole stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes, watching Kayla hum quietly at the table. She thought of all the times she'd been told to stay quiet, to let things go, to not cause trouble. And then she thought of Raina, fired for speaking, Nathaniel, standing when others sat, Kayla, whispering, "You still get to say no." We didn't just speak, she thought. We were heard. And sometimes, that was the beginning of everything. The sentencing hearing was scheduled on a Monday, gray-skied, windless, as if the weather itself held its breath. Nicole didn't dress in black. She wore a soft green sweater her grandmother once knit, frayed at the sleeves but warm in all the right places. She didn't want to look like someone in mourning. She wanted to look like someone who'd survived. Kayla walked beside her, holding a small stone in her pocket, a worry stone Nathaniel had given her that morning, pressing it gently into her palm. "Not to make you less afraid," he told her, "but to remind you that you're still here." In the courtroom, the air buzzed with reporters, attorneys, and a few local faces Nicole barely recognized, parents, maybe grandparents, people who'd heard the story and couldn't quite turn away. Carlos, the McDonald's manager, was not among them, nor was the woman from corporate who had once told Nicole over the phone, "We sympathize, but we're unable to make a public statement at this time." Sympathy had come cheap, but truth had cost everything. The judge entered, her robes dark, her face lined with years of decisions, both painful and necessary. She looked like someone who'd heard every kind of lie and was still hoping, somehow, for a scrap of honesty. The courtroom stood, then sat. The prosecutor spoke first, calm, measured. He listed the charges, the evidence, the video, the confession from one of the men, albeit partial and full of deflection. Then he said the words Nicole had repeated to herself on sleepless nights: "They chose her. They watched her. They planned." The defense tried to minimize. It was a lapse in judgment, a misinterpreted prank, a tragedy, yes, but not a crime with intent. That was when Nicole stood. The judge didn't stop her. No one did. She didn't have a written statement, no speech. She looked at the two men. One sat with his arms crossed, the other fiddled with his tie, eyes darting, avoiding. "You made her believe she was small," Nicole said, voice low but steady. "You made her think pain was a secret." She paused. But she stood up in court, on that floor, in front of strangers who didn't know if they should believe her. She took a breath, then looked at the judge. She told the truth anyway. That's more courage than most grown men ever find. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them her tears. The sentencing came quietly, 7 years, no possibility of parole for 3. Both men were led away in cuffs. The smirking one cursed under his breath. The other asked, "Can I call my mother?" No one answered. Outside the courthouse, the sky had opened, just a little, sunlight breaking through a seam in the clouds like a slow exhale. Reporters shouted questions. Nicole didn't stop, but Kayla did. She turned to one of the cameras and said simply, "No means no, even if you whisper it." The reporter blinked, caught off guard. Nicole reached for her daughter's hand. Kayla took it. They walked to the car in silence. That weekend, Nicole received a letter, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a check and a note, "You taught her to be brave." I was not. This is for the days you couldn't buy peace but gave her safety anyway. I hope it helps. Nicole stared at it for a long time, then put the check away and hung the letter on the fridge, not for the money, for the truth that someone else had finally said out loud. Nathaniel met them at the park a week later. It was a different park, new, a place with soft mulch, wider slides, no corners for danger to hide in. Kayla ran ahead, laughing as she pushed her feet into the dirt. Nicole watched her for a while before turning to Nathaniel. "Do you ever stop being scared?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then, no, but you stop letting it tell you who you are." They sat on the bench for a long time, watching children move like bright-colored flags across the playground. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. "There's a grant," he said, "a fund for mothers and children in trauma recovery. I want to name it after her." Nicole's eyes filled with something soft and stunned. "Kayla?" He nodded. "Kayla's light, if she's willing to share it." Nicole smiled. "I think she'd like that." Then, as if summoned, Kayla ran back toward them. "I made a friend," she said. "Her name's June. Her mum's sick, so she can't come outside much, but she gave me her drawing." She held it out. It was a simple sketch, 2 stick figures under a sun. Nicole knelt beside her. "What did you say to her, honey?" Kayla thought for a second. "I said, if you can't come outside, I'll bring the light to you." Nathaniel let out a quiet breath. "That settles it, then." Nicole didn't need to respond. She just held her daughter close, sunlight catching the strands of her hair like gold thread. That evening, back home, Nicole pulled a box from the closet. Inside were the shoes Kayla had worn that day, the ones she'd refused to throw away. Nicole sat on the bed and finally spoke, not to anyone in particular, maybe to the part of herself that had gone silent long ago. "We can keep what hurt us," she whispered, "but we don't have to wear it." She folded the shoes, gently kissed the toe of one, and set the box aside. Outside, wind brushed through the trees, like the earth remembering how to breathe. Some wounds don't close cleanly. Some justice doesn't clap its hands. But somewhere in the quiet between the sentencing and the sunrise, something had shifted. A little girl had told the truth, and the world, for once, had listened. Spring crept in like someone testing the lock on a long-abandoned door, softly, cautiously, with pauses between warmth and cold. It didn't announce itself, it whispered through open windows, curled around coffee cups, tucked itself into Kayla's growing silence like sunlight pressing into shadow. It had been 4 weeks since the sentencing. Nicole didn't mark time the way she used to, not by dates but by small changes, Kayla humming while brushing her hair, the moment she asked for syrup on her pancakes again, her laughter, tentative at first, returning like a song half remembered. Some days still hurt, but the world had somehow kept turning. On a Tuesday morning, Nicole stood at the school gates. They looked exactly the same, blue paint peeling from the fence, faded posters taped to the windows, the faint smell of pencil shavings and disinfectant lingering in the breeze. She remembered how tightly Kayla had once clung to her here, back when school was still just spelling tests and recess. But today felt different. The air around her child was lighter. Kayla adjusted her backpack straps. "Mom." "Yes." "Do I have to tell anyone about what happened?" Nicole crouched to her daughter's eye level. "No, sweetheart. You don't owe your pain to anyone. But you never have to hide it either." Kayla nodded slowly. "If they ask, I'll just say I got through it. That's enough, right?" Nicole smiled. "It's more than enough." And Kayla walked through the gates, shoulders straighter than Nicole had seen in months. Later that day, Nicole visited the community center Nathaniel had quietly funded, where Kayla's Light, the program named in her honor, had its first office. The paint still smelled fresh. Boxes of art supplies lined the hallway. A small sign on the door read, safe doesn't mean silence. Inside, she found Jaden's mother, Mrs. Carter, sorting donation bags. She looked up and grinned. "I saw Kayla this morning. That girl walks like she's got something to teach the world." Nicole exhaled, laughing. "She does." They worked side by side for an hour, folding clothes, stacking books. Nicole found it strangely soothing. There was something sacred about returning order to things that had been tossed aside. "How'd you find your strength again?" Nicole asked quietly. Mrs. Carter paused. "I stopped looking for it," she said. "Turns out, it never left. It was just buried under everything I thought I had to carry alone." Nicole didn't reply, but she understood. That evening, Kayla sat on the floor of her room with Jaden, drawing chalk rainbows on cardboard scraps. "Miss Thompson asked if I wanted to write about something brave," Kayla said. Jaden looked up. "Are you gonna write about the courthouse?" Kayla shook her head. "No. I'm gonna write about the day I made a friend again." Jaden smiled. "You mean me?" She nodded. "I was scared of everyone, but you said it's okay if you're scared. We can still sit next to each other." That was the bravest thing anyone did. He looked down, cheeks pink. It was just a bench. She tilted her head. It was a beginning. And neither of them spoke after that, but they didn't need to. Meanwhile, Nicole stood at the mirror, curling her hair for the first time in weeks. There was a talk scheduled that night, a gathering at the church where women came not to pray but to speak, to listen, to carry each other's stories the way old quilts carry warmth. She wasn't planning to tell everything, just enough. When her turn came, she stood beneath the soft yellow light of the fellowship hall. "There's no manual for this," she began, "for what to say to a child who's been harmed, or for what you say to yourself when you realize the world didn't protect her." A hush settled, not silence, something more reverent. "I didn't want revenge. I wanted her to be believed. I wanted to stop holding my breath every time she walked out of the room." She paused. "Some people say time heals everything. That's not true. But people do, people who stay, people who sit beside you when you can't sit with yourself." An older woman in the front row wiped her cheek. "And sometimes," Nicole added, "the healing starts when you let yourself be seen." She didn't cry, not this time. But she left the podium with something lighter in her chest than when she'd walked up. That night, Nicole tucked Kayla into bed. "Did I do okay?" she asked. Kayla nodded. "You always do okay, Mom, even when you're scared." Nicole brushed the girl's hair back from her forehead. "You know, when you were a baby, I used to hold you like this and promise you the world would be kind." Kayla looked at her. "Was it a lie?" Nicole swallowed. "No, just a hope I was still learning how to keep." Kayla thought for a moment, then whispered, "Then let's keep learning it together." Nicole kissed her temple. "Deal." Down the hallway, Nathaniel sat at the kitchen table, reading through early drafts of the nonprofit's next brochure. He paused when he saw Nicole approach. She poured them both a cup of tea. "She's sleeping," she said. "No nightmares tonight." Nathaniel looked into his cup, steam curling toward the ceiling. "Sometimes healing is quieter than pain, but it stays longer." Nicole smiled softly. "You always know what to say." He set down his cup. "Only because I've lived long enough to regret the times I said nothing." A long silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "Do you regret anything about this?" Nicole asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, only that she had to be the one to remind the rest of us what courage looks like. They clinked cups gently. Outside, wind brushed past the windows, rustling the last leaves of winter into memory. Some endings don't close a chapter, they open the page. And somewhere in a small town, on a quiet street where the porch light stayed on longer than usual, a little girl slept soundly, not because the world was fixed, but because she no longer had to fix it alone. The cemetery sat at the edge of town, quiet as a secret held too long. There were no grand angels, no polished marble, just worn stones, weathered names, and wind moving through dry grass like memory. Nicole hadn't meant to come here, but some mornings her feet knew where her heart needed to go before her mind did. Kayla stood beside her, small hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. The little girl's hair had grown longer, tied back now with a red ribbon she'd chosen herself. They stood at a grave that bore no flowers, just a name, Lydia Graves, and 2 dates carved shallow and kind, because some truths are too deep for stone. "I never met her," Kayla whispered. Nicole knelt, brushing dead leaves from the base of the marker. "No, but you carry her in you, the part that didn't give up." They both looked up as footsteps crunched behind them. It was Nathaniel, his coat buttoned against the chill, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand. "She was brave," he said softly, "but she never got to know what it felt like to be believed." He placed the flowers down, adjusting them so they wouldn't tip in the wind. Kayla reached out and helped steady them. Nicole studied him for a moment. "Why today?" He looked out toward the horizon. "Because healing doesn't just move forward. Sometimes it circles back." They stood in silence for a long time. 3 generations of grief and grace stitched together by what hadn't been said. Later that afternoon, the town library held a reading circle, part of the new Kayla's Light community outreach. Nicole had been invited to speak, though she'd nearly said no, not out of fear but because, as she told Nathaniel earlier, some wounds speak louder when they're dressed up in stories. Still, she came. The room was small. 6 women sat in folding chairs, most older, faces lined with years and knowledge and silence. One of them, Helen, brought cookies. Another, June, brought her granddaughter's drawing of Kayla and the sun. Nicole stood at the front, a single lamp casting her shadow long and soft against the back wall. She didn't read from notes. She just breathed and began. "When my daughter was hurt, I thought the worst thing was what happened to her." She paused. "But the worst thing was realizing how much of the world would rather not know, because knowing means doing, and doing means discomfort." There were nods, quiet ones. But one man stood up, and one girl didn't sit down, and that's where the shift started, not in court, not in the news, but in the space between one whisper and another. She looked at the women before her. "I don't think stories fix the world, but I know they remind us we're not the only ones still trying." A woman in the back, tears in her eyes, whispered, "Thank you." Nicole stepped down. She didn't stay for applause, there wasn't any, only shared breath, the kind that happens when someone speaks aloud what you thought only lived in you. That night, Nicole sat on the front steps of their house, an old blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The porch light hummed above her. Nathaniel sat beside her, holding a mug of coffee gone cold. He didn't speak at first, just looked out at the stars. Then, quietly, she would have been proud. Nicole looked at him. "Of Kayla?" He nodded. "Of you both, but especially of the girl who reminded me to rise when I could have stayed sitting." Nicole was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said, "after the trial, someone wrote me, a woman from Minnesota. Said she hadn't spoken to her daughter in 10 years. Said our story made her pick up the phone." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "We don't always get to know the ripples, but they move just the same." Nicole's voice dropped lower. "Do you think Lydia knows that you did this for her?" He didn't answer right away. "Then, I think she's been waiting for it to be done." And that was all he said, but it was enough. Upstairs, Kayla sat at her desk, writing a letter she'd never send. It began like this: "Dear girl who's still afraid, I don't know your name, but I know your silence. I used to live in it too. I used to think bravery meant being loud, but it doesn't. It means staying when everything inside you says run. I hope you have someone who doesn't leave. And if you don't yet, I hope you become that person for someone else, because staying matters, and telling matters, and light always finds its way back in. Love, Kayla. She folded the paper and placed it in a box on her shelf marked, Letters to No One. The box wasn't empty, but neither was she. The next morning, Nicole made pancakes. Kayla set the table. Nathaniel joined them with a bag of oranges and a story about how, as a boy, he once mistook a jar of pepper for cinnamon and ruined an entire pie. They laughed, and for the first time in a long while, it didn't sound like something broken trying to sound whole. It sounded whole, period. And in a town that once flinched at truth, a girl walked through a school hallway with her head high. A mother began to write again, not just reports or emails, but the quiet things she'd buried in the years between sorrow and survival. And an old man returned to the grave of his sister with empty hands and a full heart, not to ask for forgiveness, but to whisper the words he never got to say, "It's done, Lydia. She's safe." And I stood up this time. Because some stories don't end, they echo. And some truths aren't shouted, they're passed on quietly, like a final whisper shared from one soul to another. Life doesn't always give us warning signs. Sometimes the people who hurt others don't wear masks. Sometimes they wear uniforms or smiles or silence. But what we do next, how we choose to respond, to protect, to listen, that's where change begins. I've learned that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a little girl saying no, and a mother who refuses to walk away. Sometimes it's a stranger who chooses to stand when everyone else stays seated. And maybe that's the lesson, we're not asked to fix the whole world, just to hold our part of it with courage. To those of you watching, especially the women in our community who have lived through much and seen more than most, how do you define courage now, in this season of your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your wisdom means more than you know. And if this story brought something up for you, memories, questions, or hope, I'm here. This space is yours too. Please take care of yourself today. You've carried so much for so long. Maybe today is the day you let something go.